Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses as we continue with Part 3, Continents, from Facing the Sphinx by Marie L. Farrington. Chapter 2, Continents. One generation passeth away, and another cometh, but the earth abideth forever. Ecclesiastes, chapter 1. As the Romans adopted many customs from the Greeks and were initiated by them into science and art, so their intellectual masters, the Greeks, had received from the Egyptians through their sages the knowledge which led them on the path of glory and fame. When Solon, towards the year 600 BC, visited Egypt, he found that it was a very ancient country, already on its decline, with a long record of historical events. So long, in fact, that the Egyptian chronology was rejected as fabulous. Archaeology and astronomy have united their efforts toward a solution of the question, with the startling effect of shaking up the conviction of the greatest bigots and proving a few dates of great importance. Volney traced the Greek zodiac back 16,984 years, but since he published his observations, the famous zodiac of Dendera has been demonstrated to be at least 80,000 years old, for it shows the passage of 3 sidereal years since it originated. The cause of the apparent contradictions in the chronology of the ancient civilized races lies simply in the different manner of reckoning. It is an effect of the prevalent ideas of the same epoch. For example, the year Annus means heaven, revolution, and circle, and is closely related to religion and symbolism. History teaches us that some nations had adopted the apparent revolution of the sun in 24 hours, others the revolution of the moon in 1 month, others the interval of one solstice to another, or one season, calling each division by the generic name of revolution or year. But the knowledge of the sidereal year, or retrogradation of the sun, implies that the Egyptians knew astronomy to perfection. To have calculated that the sun with the starry heavens takes 25,868 years to return to the starting point. In fact, to have become aware of the precession of the equinoxes, the old Egyptians must have been masters in mathematics, even when they erected their famous Dendera zodiac, that is, nearly 80,000 years ago. When their civilization loomed up, we do not know. Tradition represents them always in possession of the greatest wisdom and knowledge that ever was on this earth. They claimed descent from the 12 great gods, whom some authors think meant Poseidon, Cleito, and their 10 sons. But there is another fact corroborating their descent from Atlantis. It is the mysterious celebration of the arrival of the 13 great gods by the Aztec priesthood, the high civilization of the ancient Central American and Mexican races, so peculiarly like the Egyptian culture, the same knowledge of perfect astronomical reckoning as illustrated in the colossal Aztec calendar of the Cathedral of Santo Domingo, Mexico, point conclusively to the same origin. We must bear in mind that the Aztecs had been established in the city of Mexico only for a short period at the time of the landing of the Spaniards. They were barbarians compared to the Toltecs, Mayas, Quiches, and other great races, whose passage on the American continent can be traced through the grand ruins they have left scattered so promiscuously. Religious tenets had become horribly disfigured, but we can still trace the ancient Egyptian and Mexican symbols and legends to the same source. Sanchoniathon tells us that Kronos, king of Atlantis, visited the south and gave all Egypt to the god Taut, or Thoth, son of Mysore, or Mestor, mentioned by Plato. Now, the Quiche legends represent the mystic hero Wotan as a legislator and founder of mysteries. The ballet of the Sahotun, or sacred tapers, was one of the principal features of the celebration of those mysteries. The magnificent ruins of the famous city called Zai testify to the present day to the mystic importance attached to the sacred dance of the Zai, or tapirs. Furthermore, the Quiche manuscripts mention a very important fact, namely that Wotan brought the first tapirs, perissodactyle, to the Huehuetan River, where they multiplied rapidly and where they are still to be found in large numbers. Geologists are unable to ascertain yet whether they existed in the Eocene period, but in deposits of Miocene date, remains undistinguishable generically and specifically from the modern tapirs, have been found widely distributed all over the globe, extending even to France, Germany, and England, though they seem to have become extinct in Europe before the Pleistocene period. They abound still in two widely separated regions of the Earth, to wit, in Malaysia and in America, and in no intervening places. Another very strange fact to observe is that those closely allied animals have not undergone any amount of variation in forms during such an enormous period. And while since the Miocene period, all other mammalian forms which existed have either become extinct or have undergone extensive modifications, tapirs have remained practically unchanged. It seems then very plausible to conclude that Wotan's arrival in Central America could be easily traced to a period corresponding to the great cataclysm that submerged Atlantis. For tapirs have disappeared everywhere. They can be found at present only in an insignificant part of what belonged formerly to a lost continent, and in America, whither Wotan imported them most probably from his Atlantean home. Moreover, the venerable men who danced the ballet of the tapirs carried a green palm in their hands, the emblematic twig, which Noah's dove also brought as a sign of a new period of manifestation of matter after a destructive cataclysm. This is certainly a most remarkable coincidence, proving the common origin of two great prehistoric nations who, though widely separated, agree still in their symbolism. But it would be erroneous to suppose that Atlantis or Poseidonis was only a great island. It was a great continent which did not disappear all at once but sunk partly at different times, the last of all being the once considered fabulous island of Atlantis. So that it does not appear strange that the inhabitants who escaped destruction should have located in opposite directions and at an almost insuperable distance, because they were living at a remote distance from each other. It has been calculated that the famous island described by Plato, according to the description his ancestor Solon had obtained from the wise men of Sais, was submerged about 11,000 years ago. An occurrence, or rather phenomena of that kind, could not happen if it was not a natural law in the evolutionary phases of the Earth. Lyell has remarked pertinently, "The connection between the doctrine of successive catastrophes and repeated deteriorations in the moral character of the human race is more intimate and natural than might at first be imagined. For in a rude state of society, all great calamities are regarded by the people as judgments of God on the wickedness of men. In like manner, in the account given to Solon by the Egyptian priests of the submersion of the island of Atlantis under the waters of the ocean, after repeated shocks of an earthquake, we find that the event happened when Jupiter had seen the moral depravity of the inhabitants. The vulgar loves always to see divine interference where there is really nothing but a natural phenomena. The whole universe is subject to the same cyclic law which no power can change. We see everything undergoing a slow transformation because nothing is stationary. We follow an immense spiral with many curves, either ascending or descending, and always moving onwards, impelled by a secret force, cyclic law. How can we reconstrue the chronology of the ancient continents which have disappeared is the problem of the present. Madame Blavatsky, in her last work, The Secret Doctrine, says, "The final disappearance of the largest continent of Atlantis was an event coincident with the elevation of the Alps. It is on this colossal cataclysm, which lasted during a period of 150,000 years, that traditions of all the deluges are built, the Jews building their version on an event which took place later in Poseidonis. This opinion is based on information furnished by occultists and ought not to be disregarded because science has not yet approved of it. Geology mentions many deluges incomparably older, to wit Paris, the gay capital of France, has been covered by the sea 4 times. If we should wish, however, to illustrate still more forcibly the theory of the transformations which are constantly changing the face of the earth, we would refer to the fact that the Bishop of Coutances, only 1,000 years ago, used to go to the now island of Jersey in a litter. It is also well known that the English Sea, or Channel, is eating up the French coast, and that it is only a question of time when Paris will be again on the floor of the Atlantic, slumbering for eons of ages previous to a reawakening to light. But it stands to reason that if a whole continent could be sunk, other continents must have disappeared, while others will reappear in future ages. We find on Easter Island traces of a civilization entirely different from the remains found either in Egypt, Chaldea, or Central America. It is not yet the artistic and cultured productions of a refined race like the Atlantean, but monstrous and cyclopean relics like the giant statues found also in some parts of India. In the Lemurians, we can discover the authors of many gigantic monuments and trace to them all the legends of the different towers of Babel, which were built by the Quinams in Central America and by the giants of the Mosaic flood in Asia. It is claimed that Africa is older than any other continent which is inhabited at present, and that America rose when Atlantis sunk. Is it then surprising to find the same types, legends, costumes, and traditions in Egypt and in Central America, the two widely separated nations, which belonged once to the highly civilized Atlantean race? Of the Lemurians, little is left, and still less known. But of their successors, the Atlanteans, we find remains widely spread, and admire in Grecian and Egyptian philosophy, science and art, the cultured height to which they had soared. If Egypt was so grandly, so eminently superior when the Grecian sages considered her the acme of all centers of learning and wisdom, what was she at the apex of her glory? We can only answer, we could not teach them anything that they did not know, and we could learn a great deal from them. Sir Charles Lyell, the father of geology, referring to the changes which occur periodically, says, "Respecting the cosmogony of the Egyptian priests, we gather much information from writers of the Grecian sects, who borrowed almost all their tenets from Egypt, and amongst others that of the former successive destruction and renovation of the world. We learn from Plutarch that this was the theme of one of the hymns of Orpheus, so celebrated in the fabulous ages of Greece. It was brought by him from the banks of the Nile. And we even find in his verses, as in the Indian systems, a definite period assigned for the duration of every successive world. The returns of great catastrophes were determined by the present period of the Magnus Annus, or Great Year, a cycle composed of the revolutions of the sun, moon, and planets, and terminating when these returned together to the sign whence they were supposed at some remote epoch to set out. We learn particularly from the Timaeus of Plato that the Egyptians believed the world to be subject to occasional conflagrations and deluges. The sect of the Stoics adopted most fully the system of catastrophes, destined at intervals to destroy the world. These, they taught, were of two kinds: the cataclysm, or destruction by water, and the ekpyrosis, or destruction by fire or submarine volcanoes. From the Egyptians, they derived the doctrine of the gradual debasement of man from a state of innocence. Toward the termination of each era, the gods could no longer bear with the wickedness of man, and a shock of the elements or a deluge overwhelmed them, after which calamity, Astrea again descended on the earth to renew the golden age. In Genesis, we find exactly the same theory expounded. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And behold, even I do bring a flood of waters upon the earth, to destroy all flesh wherein is the breath of life from under heaven, and everything that is in the earth shall die." This passage illustrates the cataclysm theory and agrees with the traditions of almost every ancient race. The ekpyrosis theory is obvious in the following quotations: "For we will destroy this place, because the cry of them is waxen great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord hath sent us to destroy it. Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the cities and that which grew upon the ground." This legend in Genesis does not apply to only two cities, for wherefore are the words of Lot's daughter: "Our father is old, and there is not a man in the earth to come in unto us after the manner of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve seed of our father." Such words cannot certainly apply to one individual or his two daughters, but to the disappearance of one race and the dawn of another one. Thus it is claimed that Lemuria perished by fire, but Atlantis sunk to the bottom of the ocean. We have archaeological, ethnological, geological, traditional, botanical, and even biological evidences in support of the cyclic law which rules the periods of deterioration and restoration. In our own days, the Sunda Island with 80,000 Malays sunk to the bottom of the Indian Ocean, and Greenland is losing ground so fast that no native will build by the seashore. Huxley has conclusively demonstrated that the British Islands have been submerged 4 times and then subsequently raised again, and consequently peopled each time with a new race, which must have come from some inhabited region. Madame Blavatsky in her last work says, "I believe in 7 continents, 4 have disappeared, we live on the 5th, and 2 more will appear in the future." And again, Patala, the Hindu name for America, Antipodes of India, touched Atlantis. The Hindu Aryans knew the last surviving island of Atlantis, which had perished soon after the upheaval of the 2 Americas. Thus, America is older than Europe. It is also the reason why we find in India not only traces of Atlantean culture, but also a few relics of an older race. Some gigantic remains of Lemuria, very scant it is true, but typical enough to insinuate a different epoch of disproportionate size in men, animals, plants, and monuments, such as would be suggested as having existed in Eocene and Miocene periods. It is, however, in Easter Island that the greatest bulk of such cyclopean statues has been discovered. Lyle relates a series of volcanic phenomena, earthquakes, troubled water, floating scoria, and columns of smoke, which have been observed at intervals since the middle of the last century, in a space of open sea between longitudes 20° and 22° west, about half a degree south of the equator. These facts, says Mr. Darwin, seem to show that an island or archipelago is in progress of formation in the middle of the Atlantic. A line joining St. Helena and Ascension would, if prolonged, intersect this slowly nascent focus of volcanic action. Should land be eventually formed here, it will not be the first that has been produced by igneous action in this ocean since it was inhabited by the existing species of Testacea. It would be difficult to estimate too highly the commercial and political importance which a group of islands might acquire if, in the next 2,000 or 3,000 years, they should rise in mid-ocean between St. Helena and Ascension. Donnelly, quoting the same passage, says, "These facts would seem to show that the great fires which destroyed Atlantis are still smoldering in the depths of the ocean, that the vast oscillations which carried Plato's continent beneath the sea may again bring it, with all its buried treasures, to the light, and that even the wild imagination of Jules Verne, when he described Captain Nemo in his diving armor, looking down upon the temples and towers of the lost island, lit by the fires of submarine volcanoes, had some groundwork of possibility to build upon." Sure enough, and if Atlantis should reascend to the surface of the ocean, as it will certainly in course of time, we might get considerable information from her remains concerning the Lemurian continent. But what of the Hyperboreans? Who has not read of the incomparable climate that could be enjoyed in their country, which was sheltered from storms and wind? A blessed land from which originated tempests, storms, and wind, the producer of them, but not the sufferer of any discomfort from them. Herodotus bewails his inability to discover any traces of them. He wished to inquire about them from their neighbors, the Arimaspes, who, though they possessed only one eye, were very clear-sighted, but they were unable to furnish him with any information as to their whereabouts. Other authors well-versed in ancient traditions give the name of Hyperborean to the Enchanted Islands, where the Hesperides kept watch over the famous golden apples. They were supposed to be situated in some secluded spot of the Occident. The Greeks held in great veneration their 2 great national poems, the Iliad and Odysseus. And Homer's geography was the theme and subject of many debates among their sages and philosophers. They were as sacred to the Greeks as the Bible is today to the Christians, and many times 20 verses thereof furnished sufficient material for 30 books because the text was emblematical. On his voyage to the Arctic regions, the Swedish explorer Nordenskjöld found fossils of horses, sheep, elephants, rhinoceroses, mammoths, etc. On a group of islands he discovered, which tends to credit the report of an inhabited Hyperborean continent where there are only glaciers now. There are many allegories and ancient legends referring to the changes of climate in those distant times, when from a frigid zone the polar lands had become a country with a delightful temperature. Nearly all the gods of Egypt, Phoenicia, Greece, and many other pantheons are of a northern origin because formation is from north to south, and they were all embodying true facts relative to the history of the universe or of mankind. Mythology illustrates the saying of Lefebvre, Nothing can save those that have run their course. It would be necessary to extend their cycle. Tacitus, speaking of the Hyperborean continent, says, "As I am inclined to believe that the sun produces incense and aromatic plants in the east, I am convinced that at the point where he sets, the land being nearer to him, the earth exhales, on account of her proximity to him, those precious juices which go towards forming amber." It was only a repetition of the beautiful allegory sung by the ancient poets, in which they immortalized the golden tears shed by Apollo at the death of his son Sculappius, and the hot tears which Phaeton's sisters dropped when they were informed of his untimely end. In both cases, the tears were changed into arbor, the Greek word electron, meaning the stone of the sun. Now, the Grecian sages had said, a long time before Tacitus had mentioned it, that amber was an exhalation of the earth, which was produced and hardened by the sun, and that it was to be found in the Occident and in the north. It is well known that it is an exclusive product of northern seas, but principally of the Baltic. The myth, when properly interpreted, has reference to a change, or rather transformation, of the earth, and indicative of the antiquity of man. It is claimed by occultists that there is an eternal land at the North Pole, which they call the White Island. They aver that it crowns the North Pole like a skull cap, and that it is subject to no changes whatever, remaining forever the same during the period of manifestation which is running its course. They consider the North Pole as the head of the Earth, and the source of all beneficial action taken under an astral or cosmical point of view, while to the South Pole they attribute every lethal influence for being the feet of the Earth. The following statement is authenticated by Madame Blavatsky in her Secret Doctrine. The ancients made the polar circles 7 instead of 2, as Europeans do, for Mount Meru, which is the North Pole, is said to have 7 gold and 7 silver steps leading to it. The 2 poles are said to be the storehouses, the receptacles and liberators at the same time of cosmic and terrestrial vitality, electricity from the surplus of which the Earth, had it not been for these 2 natural safety valves, would have rent to pieces long ago. At the same time, it is now a new theory that has lately become an axiom that the phenomena of polar lights is accompanied by and productive of strong sounds like whistling, hissing, and cracking. The works of Trumholtz on Aurora Borealis contain considerable information on the same subject. Many scientists admit that formation runs from north to south, strengthening by that assertion the theory that the first continent was situated at the North Pole, while astronomically and allegorically the celestial pole with its pole star in heaven is Meru among the Hindus. It is the seat of Brahma, as it was the throne of Jupiter. Typology begins with the constellation of Ursa Major, the primordial figure of the sacred number 7, the origin of numbers. With the pole star of the dragon are connected the greatest myths of archaic wisdom, which we are recovering slowly in the ruined monuments of ancient races. Even the Greeks continued the traditions of past ages in their Hyperborean Apollo, and the fossils discovered by Nordenskiold seem to confirm the reality of a Hyperborean continent. It is also admitted by all naturalists that during the Miocene period, whether 1 or several million years ago, Greenland and Spitsbergen had almost a tropical climate, and occultists place their second or Hyperborean continent exactly in the same region. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe and comment, and if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.